The stars looked different from the bridge of the horizon's edge. Captain Jake Morrison stood near the large viewing window, watching the strange blue sun of the Kepler 4-2 system cast its light across the metal hull of his ship. He had been in space for 15 years, but this moment felt special. Today, humanity would meet another intelligent species for the first time. Jake was a tall man with short brown hair and calm eyes. He had seen many dangerous situations in his career, but nothing had prepared him for this day. Behind him, his crew worked at their stations, checking systems and running final tests before the meeting. The ship hummed with quiet energy as everyone focused on their tasks. Lisa Grant sat at the tactical station, her fingers moving across the controls. She was the ship's weapons officer, a woman with sharp instincts and quick reflexes. Lisa had warned Jake about this meeting. She didn't trust the aliens they were about to meet. The Vexicari were known to be aggressive and territorial. Every report humanity had gathered suggested they were dangerous. Near the engineering console, Danny Walsh monitored the ship's power systems. He was young for an engineer on an exploration vessel, only 28 years old, but he knew the horizon's edge better than anyone. Danny had spent the last 3 days preparing the ship for anything that might go wrong. He hoped his caution was unnecessary. Claire Hughes checked her medical supplies one more time. As the ship's doctor, she would join the landing party. Claire believed in peace and understanding between species. She had studied alien biology for years, hoping for this exact moment. Her blonde hair was tied back, and she wore her standard medical uniform with the red cross symbol clearly visible. The communications officer turned toward Jake. "Captain, we're receiving a response from the Vexcari. They're sending coordinates for the meeting place. It's on the third planet, in a clearing near their main settlement." Jake nodded. "Prepare the shuttle. Lisa, Danny, Claire, you're coming with me. Standard first contact protocol. Weapons stay on the ship." Lisa frowned but said nothing. She didn't like going unarmed into unknown situations, but first contact rules were clear. Showing weapons would send the wrong message. They needed to appear peaceful and friendly. The shuttle ride down to the planet's surface took 40 minutes. Through the windows, they could see a world covered in purple vegetation and strange rock formations that rose like towers from the ground. The Vexcari had built their cities around these natural structures, creating a blend of nature and technology that looked both beautiful and alien. When they landed, the first thing Jake noticed was the smell. The air was thicker than Earth's atmosphere, carrying scents of something like cinnamon mixed with metal. The sky above was a deep purple color, and the blue sun hung low on the horizon. The Vexcari were waiting for them. Jake had seen pictures, but nothing prepared him for meeting them in person. They stood on 6 legs, their bodies covered in dark green shells that reflected the sunlight. Their heads were triangular with multiple eyes arranged in a pattern that allowed them to see in almost every direction. Long antennae moved constantly, and their mouths were filled with sharp mandibles that clicked together when they communicated. There were 5 of them. The largest one stepped forward. Through their translation device, a mechanical voice spoke. "Humans, you enter Vexcari space. Explain purpose." Jake moved forward slowly, keeping his hands visible and open. "We come in peace. We want to establish friendship between our species. We want to trade knowledge and culture. We mean no harm." The translation device processed his words. The Vexcari leader's antennae twitched rapidly. The clicking sounds grew louder and more aggressive. Something was wrong. Claire noticed it first. "Captain, their body language indicates agitation. I think something we're doing is bothering them." Jake tried to maintain his calm posture. "What should we change?" Before Claire could answer, the Vexcari leader made a sharp chittering sound. The other aliens raised their front legs high in the air. Their mandibles opened wide, showing rows of sharp teeth. Lisa grabbed Jake's arm. "Captain, that's an attack posture. We need to leave now." The translation device crackled. Humans show dominance gesture. Humans show threat display. Vexcari defend territory. Jake realized with horror what had happened. Their open hands and upright posture, meant to show peace, were being interpreted as aggressive displays. He tried to lower his hands and crouch down, making himself smaller. "No, please understand. We mean no threat. This is a misunderstanding." But it was too late. One of the Vexkari soldiers fired a weapon. A bolt of green plasma shot through the air. Danny screamed as the blast hit his shoulder, spinning him around and throwing him to the ground. The smell of burned flesh filled the air. Claire rushed to Danny's side while Lisa pulled out her emergency beacon. Horizon's Edge, this is the landing party. We are under attack. Request immediate extraction. Jake tried one more time to communicate, but the Vexkari were advancing. Their weapons charged with an angry humming sound. More plasma bolts flew toward the humans. Jake grabbed Claire and helped her lift Danny. They ran toward the shuttle as fast as they could. The shuttle pilot had already started the engines. They could hear the roar of power building as they dragged Danny up the ramp. Lisa was the last one in, firing her emergency flare gun to create a wall of bright light between them and the pursuing aliens. The shuttle lifted off just as more Vexkari soldiers arrived. Plasma bolts struck the hull, leaving black scorch marks on the metal. The pilot pushed the engines to maximum power, racing back toward orbit and the safety of the Horizon's Edge. Inside the shuttle, Claire worked frantically on Danny's wound. The plasma had burned deep into his shoulder, and he was losing blood quickly. His face was pale, and he was barely conscious. Claire injected him with pain medication and started applying synthetic skin to cover the wound. Jake sat heavily in a seat, his mind racing. The first contact had failed. Not just failed, but turned into violence. Humanity's first meeting with another intelligent species had ended with weapons fire and injuries. He felt sick thinking about it. Lisa checked the shuttle's sensors. Captain, we have a problem. 3 Vexkari warships are leaving the planet. They're following us. Jake looked at the display screen. The enemy ships were smaller than the Horizon's Edge, but faster and more maneuverable. They were already gaining on the shuttle. Get us back to the ship as fast as possible, Jake ordered. Tell the crew to prepare for emergency departure. We're leaving the system. The shuttle docked with the Horizon's Edge 8 minutes later. They rushed Danny to the medical bay while the crew prepared the ship for faster-than-light travel. But before they could engage the drive, the Vexkari warships opened fire. Energy weapons hit the Horizon's Edge, causing the entire ship to shake. Alarms blared throughout every corridor. The chief engineer's voice came over the communication system. Captain, they hit the faster-than-light drive. We can't jump. The system needs at least 6 hours of repairs before we can leave. Jake gripped the armrests of his captain's chair. They were trapped in enemy space with a damaged ship and pursuing warships. He looked at Lisa. Options? The asteroid field was vast and dark. Massive rocks floated through space, some as small as houses and others as large as mountains. The Horizon's Edge moved carefully between them, using the asteroids as cover while the crew worked on repairs. Jake watched the scanner displays, knowing the Vexkari ships were out there somewhere, hunting for them. Danny was stable, but still in serious pain. Claire had done everything she could for him, but his shoulder would need weeks to heal properly. He refused to stay in bed, though. Despite Claire's protests, Danny insisted on helping with the repairs. The ship needed him, and he wouldn't let his injury stop him from doing his job. Lisa sat at her station, tracking the movement of the Vexkari warships. They were searching the asteroid field systematically, moving from sector to sector. It was only a matter of time before they found the Horizon's Edge. She calculated they had maybe 4 hours before the enemy ships reached their hiding spot. Jake stood on the bridge, drinking bitter coffee and trying to think of a way out of this situation. They couldn't fight 3 warships. The Horizon's Edge was an exploration vessel, not a battleship. Its weapons were designed for defense against pirates and small threats, not military combat. Running was their only option, but they needed time to fix the faster-than-light drive. Suddenly, the communications officer called out, "Captain, I'm picking up something strange. There are multiple signals coming from deeper in the system. It looks like a large fleet approaching." Jake moved to look at the display. Dozens of ships were appearing on the long-range sensors. They were coming from the direction of Vexkari space, moving fast. At first, Jake thought it was reinforcements coming to help hunt down the humans. But something about their movement pattern was wrong. They weren't flying in military formations. They were scattered and disorganized. Lisa enhanced the sensor readings. Captain, those ships are damaged. Many of them are leaking atmosphere. They're not hunting. They're running from something. As they watched, more ships appeared on the sensors. It was an entire Vexkari fleet, and they were fleeing. Some of the ships were firing weapons behind them, shooting at something the human sensors couldn't detect yet. Then, one of the Vexkari vessels exploded in a bright flash of light. The communications officer worked quickly to intercept the alien transmissions. Even without proper translation, the panic in the Vexkari voices was clear. Whatever was chasing them had them terrified. Then Jake saw it. Emerging from dark space came something that made his blood run cold. The ships were organic, living things that moved through space like fish through water. They were dark brown and covered in what looked like armor plates. Tentacles extended from their bodies, grabbing onto Vexkari ships and pulling them apart. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands. "What are those things?" Lisa whispered, her voice filled with horror. Claire had moved to the bridge to see what was happening. She studied the images on the screen. "They're alive. Those aren't ships. They're creatures." The swarm of organisms attacked the Vexkari fleet with terrifying efficiency. They moved in coordinated patterns, surrounding ships and tearing them open. The humans watched as ship after ship was destroyed or consumed. The Vexkari fought back desperately, but their weapons seemed to have little effect. For every creature they destroyed, 10 more appeared. Jake realized they were witnessing something far worse than a simple conflict between species. This was extermination. The creatures weren't just destroying the Vexkari fleet, they were consuming it. Every destroyed ship was pulled apart, its materials absorbed by the swarm. Within 2 hours, the Vexkari fleet was gone. Only 3 ships survived, and they were heavily damaged. Jake watched as one of those ships broke away from the battle, heading directly toward the asteroid field. It was trailing smoke and debris, clearly dying. "They're coming toward us," Lisa said. "Should I prepare weapons?" Jake hesitated. The Vexkari had tried to kill them just hours ago. But watching the destruction of their fleet had changed something. These aliens weren't the enemy anymore. They were victims of something far worse. And that crashed ship contained living beings who needed help. The Vexkari vessel struck a large asteroid about 2 kilometers from where the horizon's edge was hidden. The impact sent pieces of rock flying in all directions. The ship came to rest in a crater, its hull broken and atmosphere leaking into space. Claire spoke quietly. "There might be survivors. They'll need medical attention." Lisa turned sharply. "Are you serious? They tried to kill us. Danny is lying in medical bay because of them. And now you want to help them?" "Yes," Claire said simply. "Because that's what we do. We're explorers, not executioners. Those beings on that ship are dying, and we can help them." Jake understood both positions. Lisa was right to be angry. The Vexkari had attacked without real provocation. Danny's injury was proof of their aggression. But Claire was also right. Letting intelligent beings die when they could save them went against everything humanity's exploration program stood for. He looked at the scanner showing the swarm of organic creatures. They were spreading through the system, landing on planets and moons. Whatever they were, they represented a threat to everyone in this sector of space. The humans, the Vexkari, and probably many other species were all in danger. "We're going to help them," Jake decided. "Lisa, Danny, Claire, suit up. We're going to that crashed ship." Lisa stood up angrily. "This is a mistake, Captain. We should focus on repairing our own ship and getting out of here." "Those creatures are spreading," Jake said, pointing at the display. "They're landing on the asteroid belt. We might not have time to repair the ship before they find us. And if we're going to survive what's coming, we might need allies. Even alien allies who tried to kill us." The walk across the asteroid's surface was difficult. The gravity was weak, and they had to use magnetic boots to stay attached to the ground. The rocks around them were dark gray and covered in ice crystals that sparkled in the light of the distant sun. Above them, they could see the organic creatures moving through space, spreading like a plague. The crashed Vexkari ship was torn open on one side. The metal was bent and twisted, still glowing red in some places from the heat of impact. Jake led the team through a gap in the hull, their flashlights cutting through the darkness inside. The interior was chaos. Equipment was scattered everywhere, and alien text covered the walls in glowing symbols. They found bodies, Vexkari crew members who had died in the crash. Claire stopped to examine them, noting their biology for future reference. Then they heard movement. Clicking sounds echoed through the damaged corridors. Jake raised his hand, signaling everyone to stop. The clicking grew louder, more aggressive. Someone was alive, and they knew humans were coming. They found 3 Vexkari survivors in what looked like a command center. The largest one was clearly in charge, his shell marked with symbols that probably indicated rank. The other 2 were soldiers, their bodies positioned protectively around their commander. When the Vexkari saw the humans, they raised their weapons. The air filled with angry clicking sounds, but their weapons were damaged, sparking and failing to charge properly. They were trapped and defenseless. Jake slowly removed his helmet, showing his face. It was a risk. The thin atmosphere would make breathing hard, and he was exposing himself to potential disease. But he needed to show trust. He needed these aliens to understand that humans were here to help, not harm. Claire followed his example, removing her helmet. She pointed to the medical equipment she carried, then pointed to the injured Vexkari. The message was clear. They were doctors here to help. The Vexkari commander watched them carefully. His antennae moved slowly, processing the situation. Finally, he lowered his damaged weapon. The clicking sounds changed, becoming softer and less aggressive. That's when the asteroid shook. A deep rumbling sound came from below them, felt through the ground more than heard through the thin air. Jake looked at his scanner. The organic creatures had landed on this asteroid. They were coming. The Vexkari commander saw Jake's face change and understood. The clicking sounds became urgent. He pointed toward deeper into the ship, then made a gesture toward the humans. Despite the language barrier, his meaning was clear. They needed to work together to survive. Jake nodded and put his helmet back on. He activated his communication link to the horizon's edge. "This is the captain. We have a situation. The hostile organisms have landed on our asteroid. We're securing 3 Vexkari survivors and returning to the ship. Prepare for possible combat." As they helped the injured aliens through the wreckage, enough getting back to the horizon's edge took longer than expected. The Vexkari moved differently in low gravity, their 6 legs struggling to find purchase on the icy surface. The largest one, the commander, was injured. Dark blue liquid leaked from cracks in his shell, leaving a trail behind them. Claire kept checking on him, worried he might not survive the journey. The organic creature pursuing them was relentless. It moved across the asteroid like a spider, its tentacles grabbing rocks and pulling its massive body forward. Every few minutes, it would stop and make a strange sound, something between a screech and a hum. Jake realized it was calling to others of its kind. They reached the horizon's edge just as 2 more creatures appeared on the horizon. The airlock opened, and the team rushed inside along with their unexpected guests. As soon as everyone was in, Lisa sealed the door and activated the ship's defensive systems. The Vexkari collapsed on the floor of the airlock, exhausted and injured. The soldiers clicked urgently at their commander, who responded in weaker sounds. Claire immediately began treating the worst injuries, starting with the commander. She had no idea about Vexkari biology, but she could see where the blue liquid was leaking from damaged shell plates. Jake removed his helmet and looked at Lisa. "Get us deeper into the asteroid field. Find a cave or a crater where we can hide the ship. And someone get me a better translation program. We need to communicate with these aliens." The ship moved carefully through the rocks while the crew dealt with their new situation. Having Vexkari on board changed everything. The aliens stayed in the cargo bay, the only area large enough for them to move comfortably. Guards were posted, though Jake made it clear they were there for everyone's protection, not to treat the Vexkari as prisoners. Danny was the first to make real progress with communication. Despite his injured shoulder, he worked with the ship's computer to analyze the clicking sounds the Vexkari made. After 6 hours of work, he discovered something interesting. The clicks weren't random. They followed mathematical patterns, almost like code. He brought his findings to Jake. Captain, I think I can build a basic communication system. It won't translate everything, but we can share simple concepts, numbers, directions, basic warnings. Jake approved the plan immediately. While Danny worked on the translation system, the rest of the crew monitored the situation outside. The organic creatures were spreading across the asteroid field. They seemed to be building something, connecting asteroids together with strange organic bridges. It looked like they were creating a hive structure. By the time Danny finished the basic translator, Claire had stabilized all three Vexkari. The commander's name came through the device as a series of clicks that the computer rendered as Zekthar. The two soldiers were called Kliktar and Veshna. The translation was rough, but it was better than nothing. Jake met with Zekthar in the cargo bay. Between them sat the translation device, clicking and humming as it tried to convert their languages. The conversation was slow and frustrating, but gradually they began to understand each other. Zekthar explained that his people had been fighting the creatures, which he called the Dravok Swarm, for almost a year. The swarm had appeared from dark space without warning and began consuming everything. Planets, ships, space stations, all were absorbed into the growing hive. The Vexkari military had thrown everything at them, but nothing worked. The swarm just grew larger with each attack. Jake shared what humans knew about the situation, which wasn't much. They had stumbled into this conflict by accident. They had no knowledge of the swarm and no way to fight it. Right now, all they wanted was to repair their ship and return to human space to warn Earth about this threat. That's when Danny made another discovery. He had been examining the Vexkari technology from the crashed ship, comparing it to human systems. The faster-than-light drives were completely different. Human drives created a bubble around the ship that moved through space. Vexkari drives folded space itself, jumping from one point to another. Danny brought this information to Jake with excitement in his voice despite his pain. Captain, if we could combine both technologies, we might create something new. A hybrid drive that's faster than anything either species has created alone. Jake looked at Zekthar. The translation device struggled with complex concepts, but the Vexkari commander seemed to understand. His antennae moved rapidly, a sign of interest. He called Kliktar over, and the two aliens examined Danny's data. Through the translator, Kliktar indicated agreement. It was possible. Difficult and dangerous, but possible. The two engineers, human and alien, began working together immediately. It was strange watching them communicate, mixing hand gestures, mathematical symbols, and the clicking translator device. But slowly they developed a plan. While the engineers worked, another crisis developed. The Dravok swarm had found them, not directly, but close enough. Creatures were moving through the asteroid field, searching systematically. They would reach the horizon's edge in less than a day. Lisa reported this to Jake with her usual direct manner. We need to make a choice, Captain. We can run with what we have and hope the partial repairs hold, or we can stay and give Danny time to finish the hybrid drive. But if we stay, we'll have to fight. Jake looked at the display showing the approaching swarm. Then he looked at the cargo bay where humans and Vexkari were working together. A crazy idea formed in his mind. Lisa, could we defend this position if we had help? If the Vexkari fought alongside us? Lisa considered the question seriously. The Vexkari are natural close combat fighters. Their body structure gives them advantages in tight spaces. If we could channel the swarm into narrow passages, force them to fight where their numbers don't matter as much, then maybe. It would still be dangerous. Jake made his decision. He called a meeting in the cargo bay with both crews present. Through the translation device, he explained the situation. They could run and probably die when the damaged ship failed. Or they could stay and fight together, giving the engineers time to finish the hybrid drive. Zekthar listened carefully. His antennae moved slowly as he processed the information. Then he clicked a response that the translator rendered simply as, "We fight." The preparation took hours. Lisa and Zekthar worked together to plan the defense. Despite the language barrier and cultural differences, they found common ground in military tactics. Zekthar understood ambushes and defensive positions. Lisa understood how to use technology to multiply force effectiveness. They identified a series of caves and tunnels near the ship that would serve as choke points. The Vexkari would position themselves in the narrow passages where their close combat abilities would be most effective. The humans would provide range support with their weapons and use the ship's sensors to track swarm movements. Claire set up a medical station that could treat both humans and Vexkari. She still didn't fully understand alien biology, but she had learned enough to address basic injuries. Veshna helped her, and despite not speaking the same language, they developed a working system of communication through gestures and demonstrations. The first attack came at dawn, though there was no real sun in the asteroid field. The swarm creatures moved through the rocks like shadows, their dark bodies blending with the darkness of space. They were different sizes, from small ones the size of dogs to massive ones as big as trucks. All of them moved with horrible coordination, working together like parts of a single organism. Jake stood at the entrance to the main cave, watching them approach on his scanner. Behind him, humans and Vexkari waited in defensive positions. This was it. The moment that would determine if cooperation between species was possible, or if they would all die here in the darkness. The first creature entered the cave system. Lisa's weapon flashed, and the organism exploded in a spray of acidic liquid. The battle had begun. The fighting was brutal and chaotic. The Dravok creatures poured into the caves, but the narrow spaces limited how many could attack at once. The Vexkari proved their worth immediately. Their sharp mandibles could tear through swarm armor that human weapons struggled to penetrate. Their 6 legs gave them stability on the uneven ground, and their multiple eyes meant they could see attacks from almost any direction. Jake fought alongside Zekthar, covering each other's weaknesses. When a creature got past Jake's weapon, Zekthar's mandibles would snap shut on it. When multiple creatures surrounded Zekthar, Jake's weapon fire would drive them back. It was terrifying and exhausting, but it was working. In the engineering bay, Danny and Kliktar worked frantically on the hybrid drive. Explosions and weapon fire echoed through the ship, but they couldn't stop. Every minute they needed was another minute the defenders had to hold the line. Claire worked in her medical station, treating injured Jake pressed himself against the cave wall as another wave of Dravok creatures surged forward. His weapon was overheating, the barrel glowing red in the darkness. Beside him, Zekthar's mandibles snapped shut on a creature trying to climb over the barricade they had built from rocks and debris. The Vexkari commander was exhausted, moving slower than before, but still fighting with fierce determination. "Say that again, Danny," Jake shouted into his communication device. "What problem?" Danny's voice came through, strained with pain and stress. "The hybrid drive works, but activating it will create a massive energy surge. It'll fry anything electronic within 2 kilometers that isn't properly shielded. That includes the cave systems where you're fighting. Captain, everyone needs to get back to the ship before we activate it, or the energy pulse will kill your communication equipment and life support systems." Jake looked down the tunnel. More swarm creatures were coming. He could hear them scraping against the rock walls, their horrible screeching calls echoing through the caves. If they pulled back now, the swarm would follow them to the ship. They would be trapped in a running battle through narrow corridors with nowhere to go. Lisa's voice cut through on the command channel. "Captain, I can see them on sensors. There's something big coming. Much bigger than anything we've seen so far." Jake switched to the tactical display on his helmet screen. What he saw made his blood run cold. A massive organism was pulling itself across the asteroid field toward their position. It was easily the size of a building, maybe larger. Dozens of tentacles pulled it forward, and its body pulsed with a sickly light. This had to be what Zekthar's people called a harvester, the creature that broke open asteroids and consumed everything inside. He made a quick calculation. At its current speed, the harvester would reach them in about 10 hours. They needed to leave long before then. But the swarm creatures in the caves showed no sign of stopping their attack. In fact, more were coming, drawn by the sounds of battle. Jake called out to Zekthar, using the translation device clipped to his belt. "Commander, we need to fall back to the ships. The hybrid drive is ready, but we must retreat first." Zekthar's response came through the clicking translator. "Retreat means swarm follows. Swarm reaches ships. All die." If we stay, we all die anyway, Jake argued. That harvester will tear this asteroid apart. Zekthar made a series of rapid clicks that the translators struggled to process. The meaning that came through was something like, no abandoned position, no abandoned warriors. Jake realized the problem. In Vexkari culture, commanders didn't retreat while soldiers still held positions. It was a matter of honor and duty. Zekthar would rather die fighting than leave his people behind. It was admirable, but also suicidal. A new voice came through on the communication channel. It was Klicktar, the Vexkari engineer. His clicks were translated as urgent and excited. Solution possible. Energy surge can weaponize, direct pulse towards swarm, destroy many, clear path. Danny's voice joined in. He's right, Captain. If we angle the energy discharge, we could turn it into a weapon. It would wipe out everything in the cave system. But that means everyone needs to be out of those caves. No exceptions. Jake looked at the battle raging around him. His crew was scattered across multiple defensive positions. The Vexkari held 3 different tunnels. Getting everyone back to the ship in time would require perfect coordination and more than a little luck. He made the call to Lisa. I need you to organize a fighting retreat. Everyone falls back by sections. Maintain overlapping fields of fire. Don't let the swarm mass for a charge. Lisa acknowledged and began issuing orders. The retreat started immediately. The humans at the farthest positions pulled back first, covered by those closer to the ship. The Vexkari proved their worth again during this phase. Their ability to move quickly in low gravity and fight in multiple directions made them perfect for rearguard actions. Jake stayed at the front line with Zekthar and 2 other Vexkari soldiers. They would be the last to retreat, holding the position until everyone else was safe. It was the most dangerous job, and Jake wouldn't ask anyone else to do it. The swarm seemed to sense the humans, and Vexkari were retreating. Their attacks became more aggressive, more coordinated. Creatures threw themselves at the defensive positions with suicidal fury. Jake's weapon ran dry, and he had to reload while Zekthar held the line alone. The Vexkari commander was magnificent in combat, his mandibles and legs working together in a deadly dance. One by one, the defensive positions fell back. Jake watched on his tactical display as green markers representing his crew and their allies moved toward the ship, but the retreat was taking too long. The harvester was getting closer, and the swarm creatures kept coming in larger numbers. Then disaster struck. A section of the cave system collapsed, blocking one of the retreat routes. 3 humans and 2 Vexkari were cut off, trapped behind tons of fallen rock. Lisa's voice came through urgently. Captain, we have people trapped in Section 7. The tunnel collapsed. We need to find another way to get them out. Jake studied his map. There was another route, but it went deeper into the cave system, closer to where the swarm was concentrated. It would be dangerous and time-consuming. Time they didn't have. Zekthar was already moving before Jake could respond. The Vexkari commander clicked orders at his soldiers and began heading toward the trapped crew members. Through the translator, his intent was clear. He would lead the rescue himself. Jake ran after him. Commander, we don't have time for this. The harvester will be here soon. Zekthar stopped and turned. His antennae moved in a pattern that the translator rendered as firm and absolute. No leave soldiers, never leave soldiers. All return or none return. In that moment, Jake understood the depth of Vexkari loyalty. They wouldn't abandon their people, even at the cost of their own lives. It was a code of honor that transcended species differences, and Jake realized that if he wanted this alliance to mean anything, he had to honor that code too. All right, Jake said, let's go get them. The journey through the collapsed tunnel was nightmarish. They had to crawl through narrow gaps, pushing aside rocks and debris. Behind them, the sounds of the swarm grew louder. The creatures were following them, hunting them through the darkness. They found the trapped group in a small chamber. The cave-in had sealed them in, but they were alive and fighting. Swarm creatures had found another entrance and were attacking from below. The defenders had built a crude barricade and were holding on, but they were running out of ammunition and energy. Jake and Zekthar's group hit the swarm from behind, catching them by surprise. The battle was fierce but brief. With enemies on 2 sides, the swarm creatures were quickly destroyed. The trapped crew members were injured but mobile. Getting everyone back took precious time. They had to move slowly, helping the injured and watching for more swarm attacks. Jake kept checking his chronometer, watching the minutes tick away. They were cutting it very close. Finally, they emerged from the cave system. The horizon's edge was visible ahead, its lights blazing in the darkness. The rest of the crew was already on board, and the ship's engines were warming up. But there was a problem. Swarm creatures had surrounded the ship. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, forming a living carpet between the rescue group and safety. The Harvester was visible on the horizon now, its massive form blotting out the stars as it moved closer. Lisa's voice came through on an open channel. "Captain, we're ready to clear a path. But you need to run. When I start firing, you run and don't stop." Jake looked at Zekthar and the others. They were exhausted, injured, barely able to stand. But they nodded. They would run or die trying. The ship's weapons opened fire. Beams of energy cut through the swarm, carving a narrow path toward the airlock. Jake ran, his magnetic boots pounding against the asteroid's surface. Around him, humans and Vexkari ran together, united by desperation and determination. Swarm creatures lunged at them from both sides. Jake fired his weapon without aiming, just spraying fire to keep them back. One of the Vexkari soldiers fell, grabbed by a creature's tentacle. Jake turned to help, but Zekthar was faster. The commander's mandibles severed the tentacle, and they pulled the soldier free. The airlock was 50 meters away, then 30, then 10. Jake could see crew members inside, waving them forward. The swarm was closing in, the path Lisa had created collapsing behind them. They made it. The last person through the airlock was Zekthar, and he was still fighting off creatures as the door closed. The seal activated just as a swarm creature slammed into it from outside, its tentacles scraping against the metal. Danny's voice came through the ship's communication system. "Everyone's aboard, activating hybrid drive in 30 seconds. Brace for energy discharge." Jake pulled himself to his feet and staggered to the bridge. Throw. The horizon's edge dropped out of faster-than-light travel 3 star systems away from the Dravok swarm. The sudden stop threw everyone forward against their restraints. Alarms blared throughout the ship as systems struggled to adjust to the incredible speeds they had just experienced. The hybrid drive had worked, but the stress on the ship's structure was enormous. Jake remained in his command chair, breathing heavily. His body ached from exhaustion and countless small injuries. Around him, the bridge crew checked their stations and called out status reports. Everything was functioning, barely. The ship needed repairs, serious ones, but they were alive and safe. For now. Lisa pulled up a sensor scan. "We're in uncharted space, Captain. No Vexkari presence, no swarm contacts. Looks like we made it." In the cargo bay, Zekthar and his soldiers were receiving treatment from Claire. The Vexkari commander had multiple cracks in his shell, and he had lost a significant amount of that dark blue fluid he used for blood. But he was alive, and the fierce determination in his multiple eyes hadn't dimmed at all. Claire worked carefully, using synthetic patches to seal the worst cracks. She had learned a lot about Vexkari biology during the crisis. Their shells could regenerate given time, but they needed to keep the fluid inside their bodies from leaking out. It was similar to how humans needed to stop bleeding, just with different biology involved. Danny sat in the engineering section, his injured shoulder wrapped in fresh bandages. Despite his pain, he was smiling. The hybrid drive had worked better than he or Kliktar had dared hope. They had achieved speeds that would have taken weeks to travel in just hours. If this technology could be refined and shared, it would revolutionize space travel for both species. Kliktar sat beside Danny, his antennae moving in slow, satisfied patterns. The two engineers had formed a bond during their work together. They didn't need much translation anymore. Mathematics and engineering principles were universal languages that transcended species differences. Through equations and diagrams, they could communicate complex ideas faster than words ever could. Jake called a meeting in the main conference room. It was crowded with both humans and Vexkari present. The translation device sat in the center of the table, clicking and humming as it processed their different languages. The conversation would be slow and difficult, but it was necessary. Through the translator, Jake addressed Zekthar directly. Commander, your people and mine just survived something that should have killed us all. We did it by working together. But now we face difficult questions. What happens next? Zekthar's antennae moved thoughtfully. His response came through in measured clicks. Vexkari Collective will not believe human friendship possible. Our first meeting ended in violence. Trust broken. Very broken. Jake nodded. Earth's government will say the same thing. They'll see you as threats. They'll want to prepare for war, not alliance. Lisa spoke up. But we have proof that cooperation works. We fought together. We survived together. That has to mean something. Claire added her thoughts. We also have a common enemy. The Dravok swarm doesn't care about borders or politics. It consumes everything. If we fight separately, we'll both lose. Together, we might have a chance. Zekthar made a clicking sound that the translator struggled with. It came through as something like agreement mixed with uncertainty. Vexkari already lost many ships, many worlds. Collective weakened, need allies. But pride says no, ask for help. Culture says Vexkari strong alone. Jake understood the problem. Both species had pride and cultural barriers that made cooperation difficult. Humans naturally distrusted aliens after centuries of science fiction stories painting them as threats. The Vexkari had their own history of conflict that made them suspicious of outsiders. Overcoming those barriers would take time and effort that they might not have. But there was something else, something that had happened during the battle that gave Jake hope. He had seen it in the way humans and Vexkari had fought together, the way they had covered each other's weaknesses and supported each other's strengths. They had stopped seeing each other as human or alien and started seeing each other as fellow soldiers, fellow survivors. I have an idea, Jake said. What if we don't ask our governments to trust each other? What if we show them that trust is possible? We return home together. We present our case together. We show them the recordings of what happened. Let them see humans and Vexkari fighting side by side against the swarm. Zekthar considered this. Visual evidence strong. But politicians see what they want to see. They twist truth to fit agenda. That's true everywhere, Jake admitted. But we also have something they can't ignore, the hybrid drive. That technology could benefit both our species enormously. Trade that technology freely, show good faith, and it becomes harder for politicians to paint each other as enemies. Lisa looked skeptical. You're asking us to give away military technology to a species we were fighting just days ago. A lot of people back home won't like that. And Vexkari Collective will not trust human promises, Zekthar added. Too easy to say friendship now. Attack later. Danny raised his good hand. What if we do it together? Not humans giving technology to Vexkari or the other way around, but both species working together, sharing everything. Make the technology dependent on cooperation. Neither side can use it fully without the other. Kliktar's antennae moved rapidly. Through the translator, his enthusiasm was clear. Create joint development. Human drive plus Vexkari drive equals hybrid. Separate parts useless. Together parts revolutionary, forces cooperation. It was a brilliant solution. By making the technology require both human and Vexkari components, neither species could weaponize it against the other. They would have to work together or not benefit at all. It created mutual dependence, which might lead to trust over time. The meeting continued for hours. They discussed how to approach their respective governments, what evidence to present, and how to handle the inevitable resistance. Jake and Zekthar agreed to travel to both human and Vexkari space together, presenting a united front. But first, they needed to address something more immediate. The crew had been through trauma together. Humans and Vexkari had bled together, fought together, and survived together. That created bonds that transcended politics and species differences. They needed to acknowledge those bonds before they separated. Claire suggested a memorial service for those who had died. 3 humans had been killed in the fighting, and 5 Vexkari had perished before the escape. Different species, different cultures, but all deserving of honor and remembrance. They held the service in the cargo bay, the only space large enough for everyone. Jake spoke about the human crew members who had fallen, sharing stories about their lives and service. Zekthar did the same for the Vexkari. His clicks translated into words that honored their courage and sacrifice. Then something unexpected happened. One of the human crew members, a young woman named Katie Brown, started singing. It was an old Earth song about loss and hope, simple and beautiful. The Vexkari listened, their antennae moving gently. When she finished, Veshna, one of the Vexkari soldiers, made a series of rhythmic clicks. It was a Vexkari morning chant, different from human music but somehow similar in its emotion. The two species stood together in silence after that. Humans and Vexkari united in grief and respect. It was a moment that transcended language and culture. Death was universal, and so was the need to honor those who had fallen. Over the following days, as the ship made its way toward the border between human and Vexkari space, something beautiful developed. The crew began sharing more than just work and duty. They shared culture and stories. Katie taught some of the Vexkari about human music. They seemed fascinated by the concept of melody and harmony, things that didn't exist in their clicking language. The Vexkari shared their history, tales of their people's long struggle for survival on their harsh home world. They showed the humans images of their cities, great towers that spiraled up toward the sky, built around natural rock formations. It was alien but also strangely beautiful. Danny and Clicktar continued refining the hybrid drive, making it more efficient and stable. They worked in comfortable silence now, occasionally sharing ideas through gestures and simple diagrams. Their partnership had become natural, proof that cooperation didn't require perfect understanding, just mutual respect and common goals. Lisa and Zekthar developed something close to friendship. They spent hours discussing tactics and strategy, comparing human and Vexkari approaches to warfare. Despite their different perspectives, they found common ground in their dedication to protecting their people. Lisa even learned some Vexkari combat techniques, adapting them for human physiology. Claire and Veshna worked together in the medical bay, combining human and Vexkari medical knowledge. They created treatment protocols that could address injuries for both species. It was groundbreaking work that could save countless lives in the future. Jake spent time with Zekthar, preparing for the difficult conversations ahead. They practiced their arguments, anticipated objections, and developed contingency plans. Despite the language barrier and cultural differences, they developed a mutual respect. Both were commanders who cared deeply about their crews and their people. That common ground was more important than any differences. As they approached the border, Jake called another meeting. This time, the mood was different. The tension and suspicion from before had faded, replaced by something like camaraderie. These beings from different worlds had been through hell together and come out stronger on the other side. "We're about to enter the most difficult phase of this mission," Jake said. "When we arrive at Earth and at the Vexkari homeworld, we'll face skepticism and fear. People will question our decisions. They'll say we were foolish to trust each other. But we know the truth. We know that cooperation is possible because we've lived it." Zekthar clicked in agreement. Many obstacles ahead. Many of the Horizon's Edge entered Earth's solar system 3 weeks after escaping the Dravok swarm. Long-range communications had been sending messages ahead, preparing humanity for what was coming. The response from Earth had been mixed. Some officials were excited about first contact. Others were terrified. Most were simply confused about why an exploration ship was bringing aliens directly to Earth. Jake stood on the bridge, watching Mars grow larger in the viewing window. Behind Mars, Earth hung like a blue jewel in the darkness. He had left this system months ago as a simple exploration captain. He was returning as something else entirely. An ambassador. A bridge between species. A witness to horrors that most humans couldn't imagine. Beside him, Zekthar watched the same view. The Vexkari commander's antennae moved slowly, taking in the sight of humanity's home system. Through the improved translator they had developed during the journey, he clicked a question. "Your world is beautiful, much water. Vexkari. Homeworld has little water. We envy species that have oceans." "Maybe someday you'll visit our oceans," Jake replied. "As a guest, not as enemies." That would be good, Zekthar clicked. Very good. The welcoming party met them at Earth's main orbital station. It was a massive structure that housed thousands of people and served as humanity's gateway to space. Military ships surrounded it, weapons ready but not targeting. They were cautious, watching the alien vessel that accompanied the horizon's edge. Zekthar's remaining ship had followed them through the journey, its crew equally nervous about meeting humanity's leaders. Admiral Patricia Cooper commanded the welcoming fleet. She was a stern woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. When Jake and Zekthar's group boarded the station, she studied the aliens carefully before speaking. Captain Morrison, you've caused quite a stir. When you left Earth, your mission was to observe and report, not to bring aliens home with you. Jake stood straight. Admiral, circumstances changed. We encountered a threat that affects everyone. Human, Vexkari, and probably every other species in this part of the galaxy. We need to talk, and more importantly, Earth's leaders need to listen. Admiral Cooper's expression softened slightly. I've reviewed your preliminary reports. This Dravok swarm sounds terrifying, but bringing potential enemies to Earth without authorization was a significant risk. Zekthar clicked through the translator. Vexkari not enemy. Vexkari ally. Fought together, survived together, stronger together. The Admiral looked at the alien commander with surprise. She hadn't expected such a direct statement. I'm not the one who needs convincing, Commander. It's the politicians and military leaders you'll need to persuade. The presentation to Earth's Council of Nations took place 2 days later. The council chamber was a semicircular room with representatives from every major nation on Earth. They sat in tiered rows, looking down at the central floor where Jake, Zekthar, and their crews stood. The atmosphere was tense. Many of the representatives looked frightened just having aliens in the same room. Jake began the presentation with a simple statement. We went looking for friends among the stars. We found enemies instead. But through that conflict, we discovered something important. Friendship between species isn't just possible. It's necessary. He showed them the recordings. Footage of the first contact going wrong. The misunderstanding that led to violence. The desperate fight for survival. The decision to help crashed Vexkari despite their previous conflict. The combined defense against the Dravok swarm. And finally, the escape using the hybrid drive technology. The council watched in silence. Some representatives looked shocked. Others appeared skeptical. But they all watched until the end. Then Zekthar spoke. His clicks came through the translator as careful, measured words. Vexkari made mistake. Saw human peaceful gesture as threat. Culture difference caused violence. We regret. We learn. Humans showed mercy when could show vengeance. Saved Vexkari lives. Worked together against common enemy. This is foundation for trust. One of the council members, an older man from Europe, spoke up. How do we know this isn't a trick? You could be scouting Earth's defenses while pretending to be friends. Lisa stepped forward. Counselor, I was skeptical too. I didn't trust the Vexkari. I wanted to leave them to die. But I watched Commander Zekthar refuse to abandon his soldiers even when it meant certain death. I watched Vexkari warriors fight beside humans to protect all of us. I've bled alongside them. Trust isn't given freely. It's earned. They've earned mine. Danny added his perspective. The hybrid drive we developed only works because both species contributed. Neither humans nor Vexkari could have created it alone. That's what cooperation looks like. Achieving things together that we can't achieve separately. Claire spoke about the medical advances they had made. I've learned more about alien biology in 3 weeks than I could have learned in years of isolated study. The Vexkari shared their knowledge freely. We're developing treatments that could save lives across both species. That's not the action of enemies preparing for war. The questions continued for hours. Some representatives remained hostile and suspicious. Others were curious and cautiously optimistic. But slowly, opinion began to shift. The evidence was too strong to ignore. The recordings showed clear cooperation between species under extreme conditions. The technology sharing demonstrated good faith. The survival of both groups proved that working together produced results. Finally, the council's leader called for a vote. The question before us is simple. Do we establish formal diplomatic relations with the Vexkari Collective? Do we pursue an alliance against the Dravok Swarm? Or do we maintain isolation and face whatever comes alone? The vote wasn't unanimous. Some representatives voted against the alliance, citing concerns about security and cultural differences. But the majority voted in favor. Earth would establish formal relations with the Vexkari Collective. They would share the hybrid drive technology. They would coordinate defenses against the Dravok Swarm. Humanity would take its first steps into a larger community of species. Jake felt relief wash over him. It wasn't a perfect outcome, but it was a beginning. The hard work of building trust would take years, maybe generations. But they had made the first crucial step. After the vote, Admiral Cooper approached Jake and Zekthar. Congratulations, you've just changed the course of human history. I hope you're ready for what comes next. What comes next? Jake asked. Joint operations, combined training, cultural exchange programs, and eventually, a united fleet to face the Dravok Swarm. You two started this. You'll need to help guide it. The journey to the Vexkari homeworld took another 3 weeks. The hybrid drive made the trip faster than conventional travel, but it was still a long journey. During that time, Jake and his crew learned more about their alien allies. They studied Vexkari history and culture, preparing for the meeting with the collective's leaders. The Vexkari homeworld was called Vexkar Prime. It was a harsh planet, mostly desert with scattered seas and mountain ranges. The cities were built vertically, massive towers that reached toward the sky. It was beautiful in an alien way, completely different from Earth but no less impressive. The reception on Vexkar Prime was even more hostile than on Earth. The Vexkari were a proud species with a long history of warfare. Many in their government viewed the alliance with humans as weakness. The debate in their council chambers was fierce, with clicking arguments that the translators struggled to fully convey. But Zekthar spoke passionately about what he had witnessed. He told them about human courage and honor, about their willingness to help even former enemies, about the strength that came from cooperation, and most importantly, about the Dravok Swarm and the existential threat it represented. The vote in the Vexkari Collective was closer than on Earth, but it passed. The alliance was official on both sides. Humanity and the Vexkari would stand together against the Swarm and whatever other threats the galaxy might hold. 6 months later, Jake stood on the observation deck of the newly commissioned joint station that orbited between Earth and Vexkar Prime. The station was a marvel of combined engineering, incorporating both human and Vexkari design principles. It served as a meeting place, a research facility, and a symbol of what cooperation could achieve. Below him in the main bay, he could see humans and Vexkari working together. Scientists from both species collaborated on new technologies. Military officers trained together, learning combined tactics. Diplomats worked to smooth over cultural misunderstandings before they could become conflicts. It wasn't perfect. There were still incidents and problems. Some humans couldn't get past their fear of the aliens. Some Vexkari still viewed humans as weak and unreliable. But slowly, steadily, progress was being made. Lisa had been promoted to commander of the Joint Security Force. She was training the first mixed units of human and Vexkari soldiers. The early results were promising. The combined forces were more effective than either species alone, just like in the caves on that asteroid. Danny and Kliktar led the engineering teams developing new applications for the hybrid drive. They had become famous in both species, symbols of successful cooperation. Their friendship had inspired others to bridge the gap between human and alien. Claire ran the medical research division, combining human and Vexkari medical knowledge. The treatments they developed were saving lives on both worlds. She had even started training Vexkari in human medical techniques and learning their healing methods in return. Zekthar commanded the Vexkari contingent on the station. He and Jake met regularly to discuss strategy and coordinate their efforts. The former enemies had become close friends, bound by shared experience and mutual respect. They often joked that they had been forced to become allies, but had chosen to become friends. The Dravok swarm remained a threat. Long-range scouts reported that it was still spreading, consuming more systems. But now humanity and the Vexkari were preparing together. Ships with hybrid drives were being built. Combined fleets were training. Scientists from both species worked on weapons and defenses. Jake received a message one day from Earth's Council of Nations. They wanted him to lead the first joint exploration mission into unknown space. The goal was to find other species and warn them about the swarm. To build a coalition of worlds that could stand together against the threat. To prove that cooperation between different species wasn't just possible, but essential. He accepted immediately. This was what he had always wanted. Not just to explore the stars, but to build bridges between the species that lived among them. The mission that had begun with violence and misunderstanding had led to something beautiful. A vision of the galaxy where different species worked together instead of fighting each other. That evening, Jake hosted a small gathering in his quarters. Lisa, Danny, Claire, Zekthar, Kliktar, and Veshna were all there. They shared food and stories, mixing human and Vexkari customs. It was awkward sometimes, but also warm and genuine. "I've been thinking about that first day," Lisa said, "when everything went wrong and we were shooting at each other. If someone had told me then that we'd end up here having dinner together as friends, I would have thought they were crazy." Zekthar's antennae moved in what they had all learned to recognize as amusement. Vexkari would say same. Cultural teachings say aliens are enemies, but experience teaches different lesson. Enemies can become allies. Allies can become friends. Danny raised his glass. To friendship across the stars. And to proving that the galaxy is better when we work together. They all raised their glasses and cups. Human and Vexkari together. Outside the window, Earth and Vexkar Prime were both visible. Two worlds that had been strangers and briefly enemies, but were now partners in building a better future. Jake looked at the faces around him, human and alien both. This was what exploration was really about. Not just discovering new worlds, but discovering new ways of living together. Not just learning about other species, but learning from them. Not just surviving threats, but overcoming them together. The mission that had forced humans and aliens to rely on one another had shown them something vital. The universe was vast and full of dangers, but it was also full of possibilities. And the greatest possibility of all was that different species, despite all their differences, could find common ground, could work together, could build something better than either could create alone. The journey was just beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more conflicts to resolve, more misunderstandings to overcome. But Jake had faith that if they stayed committed to cooperation and mutual respect, they could handle whatever the galaxy threw at them. Because they had learned the most important lesson of all. In the darkness of space, surrounded by threats and unknowns, the only way to survive was together. And survival was just the beginning. Together, they could do more than survive. They could thrive. They could explore. They could build a future where species differences were strengths rather than weaknesses. As the gathering continued, filled with laughter and clicking sounds that had become familiar, Jake thought about the words he would use when addressing the new mission crew. He would tell them about that desperate fight in the caves, about the moment when humans and Vexkari stopped seeing each other as threats and started seeing each other as allies, about the power of choosing cooperation over conflict, and he would end with the simple truth that had been proven in fire and blood. We are stronger together, always. Ice is against friendship. But we have proof. We have experience. We have strength together that neither species has alone. Lisa spoke up. The Dravok swarm is still out there. It's still consuming worlds and spreading. If we can't convince our governments to work together, more people will die. Human and Vexkari, both. Then we make them understand, Danny said firmly. We show them what we've accomplished. We show them that the future doesn't have to be about conflict between species. It can be about cooperation against common threats. The meeting ended with a sense of purpose. They had a mission now that went beyond simple survival. They were ambassadors for a new kind of relationship between species, one based on mutual respect and shared goals rather than fear and suspicion. Ugh, the viewing window. He could see the harvester. It was almost on top of them, its tentacles reaching out toward the asteroid. Do it now, Jake ordered. The hybrid drive activated. The ship's lights flickered and then blazed with brilliant intensity. Energy poured out in a massive wave, washing over the asteroid like a tsunami. Every swarm creature in the cave system was instantly fried. The ones surrounding the ship were thrown back, their bodies smoking and twitching. The horizon's edge launched upward, breaking free of the asteroid's weak gravity. The hybrid drive engaged fully, and space twisted around them. They were moving faster than light, faster than anything human or Vexkari had achieved before. Behind them, the harvester reached the asteroid and began tearing it apart, but they were already gone. Rees as fast as she could. Human burns, Vexkari shell damage, all were addressed with whatever supplies she had. Veshna helped, learning quickly how to handle human medical equipment. Hours passed. The swarm kept coming, wave after wave. Bodies piled up in the caves, both swarm creatures and defenders. Jake's arms ached from firing his weapon. Zekthar's shell was cracked in several places, leaking that dark blue fluid. But they held the line. Then Danny's voice came over the communication system. Captain, the hybrid drive is ready, but there's a problem. Her tremor shook the ground. This one was stronger, closer. Through a gap in the hull, Jake saw something that made his heart race. One of the organic creatures was pulling itself across the asteroid's surface, its tentacles gripping the rock. It was massive, easily the size of a building, and it was heading directly toward them. They ran. Humans and Vexkari together, fleeing through the darkness of the crashed ship toward safety. Behind them, the creature broke through the hull with a horrible screeching sound. The hunt had begun, and the uneasy alliance between humans and aliens had been forged in the fires of desperation. She studied her tactical display. There's an asteroid belt around the fourth planet. If we can reach it, we might be able to hide long enough to make repairs. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all they had. Jake gave the order, and the horizon's edge turned toward the distant asteroid field. Behind them, the Vexkari ships followed, and humanity's first contact mission had become a desperate fight for survival.